When Don Bunting was here, one thing he said is when we're trying to help each other, he turned to one of Paul's passages, and you might remember Don kept on saying, Paul kept saying to them, "You know me, you know me." Don was emphasizing that Paul was saying, look, when we're dealing with each other, we all have to remember that we are not perfect. The one who is saying, hey, can we do better, is not perfect. It was a good reminder for me to hear that. Not that I think that I'm perfect, but to say, hey, look, I know I'm up here a lot, but I know that I'm imperfect also. And so when we're trying to encourage each other, be aware that I'm not perfect. At the same time, I'm encouraged for this group and from this group here. Okay, so our study, by way of review, up here, we have our wonderful chart. I love this chart. It's one of my favorite charts, but people say that there's too much information on it. The yellow is all the biblical text, right? And the idea behind this chart initially was just to see how scattered the texts are chronologically, okay? But in order to incorporate all that, I also included the white part, which is what we would call the history of the world. And we are now down here. So Syria's long gone, Assyria is gone, Babylon is gone, and now we're down here where Cyrus is ruling in Persia, and someday, Lord willing, we'll get down there to Greece. In the red, you'll see that we have, what I'm putting up there as competition, although there really isn't any, to the Lord's. These are man-made religions. Okay, so we are down here, Ezra 6, 5:16. That's what you read in preparation for today. At least I know George did, because he did his questions, because he shook his paper at me to let me know he did the questions. So we're down here, all the way down to 5:16. Now, this might go slowly. I don't know if something just happened here. All right, I want us to see a couple things here. The Republic of Rome is, well, first of all, understand there has been a kingdom of Rome. They were ruled by two kings from 740 or so. But it's turned to a republic. That's in 510. Now that will have happened in the text that you guys read tonight. You read Esther. By the time Esther's queen, Rome is already a kingdom and getting more and more powerful. Also, the Battle of Marathon. The Battle of Marathon, which is over in Greece, okay? That's way over here. What has happened there is there was a Athenian who said, I want to go and provoke the Persians. And what they did is they went to Sardis, which is right here. Sardis is right there. And they burned the city of Sardis. And that wasn't the smartest thing somebody's ever done. When they burned that, Darius, the king, found out it was the Athenians. And he said, who are the Athenians? Because they're still actually kind of small at the time. Having his answer, he asked for a bow. He took it, fitted an arrow to it, and shot it into the sky. And as he sent it up, he prayed, Zeus, grant me the chance of punishing the Athenians. Having said that, he ordered one of his servants that, as often as a meal was set before him, the man should thrice, on each occasion, say, Master, remember the Athenians, because he was going to get them back for what they did. So, King Darius goes on over, and he battles against the Athenians at Marathon, and loses. Whoops. Yeah. So, 10 years later, his son, a dude named, over here we're in Esther, so I have Esther over here from 485 to 464, because that is when Ahasuerus or Xerxes, does one of your versions say Xerxes?
Ahasuerus.
Yeah, Ahasuerus, or whatever you say there. Yeah. That guy. Okay, he'll come. He's Darius' son. So Darius lost in 490, but Xerxes goes back, and in 480 he wins the Battle of Thermopylae, and then goes all the way down around here Again, we're not really on there. And he just basically crushes Greece. So he upsets these people. That will be Esther's husband. Although this will actually take place roughly 2 or 3 years before Esther's... It takes place in between Vashti and Esther. Right in between them. There's about a 5-year gap between the two of them. Okay. So over here we have Ezra 7 through 10. Now we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I want to get ahead of ourselves on purpose. We got Nehemiah is coming down there. And then I think, yes, we have Socrates, which is 470, which is going to happen right after what we read as we prepared our text today. And Plato and Aristotle come along. Okay. And then, because of all the action down here, Alexander the Great is going to rouse the Grecians and say, hey, let's go beat up on the Persians for what they did to us at the Battle of Thermopylae and afterward. And so Alexander the Great will take off and come over here. All right. Now, that is what has happened. By the way, if I'm going too fast...
There was other religions going on. These are just the philosophies that have survived.
What?
Well, you put up the philosophies that have survived, but it's...
Yes.
Like,
yeah, good point.
There's a lot more red.
Yeah, there will be in just a second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot more red. There won't be a lot more red up there. You're right. There's 1,000 little red dots here and there and everywhere. These are just the big ones that have survived that we know about also. If you have a question about some of this history and I can answer it, I will. If I can't, then I won't. This is a rough overview of history. Now, get in your review mind for Bible class review. In history, what had God just done?
Punish the Jews. Yes.
Punish the Jews? What did you say?
Captivated them.
Captivate. Yes?
Yeah.
That too?
But now they're rebuilding.
Okay, and now we're missing something in there though. Yes, he captivated them by capturing them.
Oh, the law.
Okay.
He turned them.
He turned, yes, he what?
Returned.
Yes, while they are in Babylon, what does God do while they're in Babylon with respect to himself? Let me ask a different question. What does every king of Babylon that we know of acknowledge? Jehovah is God. I'm not saying that they all became monotheist Jehovah worship. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. But each of them that we have a list of, chapters 1 through 6 in Daniel, God says, or they say, these people say, Jehovah, Jehovah. They use his name, Jehovah. He's a deliverer. He knows everything, and his ways are just. Those are the 3 conclusions of 3 of the texts that they say. So, and they send these letters out into their entire realm, which is all the world at that time. So all the world, God has made himself available. Very much so. Now, I realize there's going to be confusion, but in fact, there will be some more confusion. So, if God has made himself, in fact, Ezra chapter 1 is Cyrus writing a decree saying, hey, all of you go back. And he goes out to all his kingdom, says, any Jew anywhere, go on back, build your temple to your God, and anybody who's there, support him. So, this dude right here, Cambyses, this is just one example I'm about to read of something, a prevailing idea. This dude, Cambyses II, okay? He's down in Egypt. He goes down to Egypt and he's upset about something. The priests in Egypt brought Apis to him, who is a quote-unquote god, in the form of a bull. Cambyses was nearly lunatic when they brought him. He drew his dagger and made a stab at Apis's belly, but struck the calf in the thigh. At this he burst into laughter and said to the priest, you miserable wretches, is that the kind of your gods? Things of blood and flesh and susceptible to iron. He goes down there, he drives a sword on a cow, sticks it in the cow, and then laughs at them and says, there's your God. Now, 2 points about this. Number one, are they starting to get that their gods are no gods at all? They are. This is when this is really going to snowball on for the next few hundred years. But the second thing is this. If God has made himself aware to all the kingdom, including down there in Egypt. Why are they still wrestling about who the real God is? Why? I can think of a couple reasons.
Men prefer darkness because their deeds are evil.
Same. In one way, the answer is the same as we get today. Why don't people like God? I just answered it. They don't like God. That's why they don't. Why doesn't everybody accept Jehovah and Jesus Christ, His Son, in the Bible? Well, because they don't want to, right? That's part of it. Obviously, that's very much part of it.
And if you have the truth, why doesn't everybody?
Yes.
That goes right along with it.
Right.
You know.
Right.
This is the truth. Why doesn't everybody?
Yeah. Why doesn't it's easy to see? Yeah. It was easy to see back then too. Here, watch me kill your God. Right? So why are they still... Okay. So if I can jump ahead here in my wonderful, wonderful charts, what I want to do is go to... All right, here's a little more red. Okay, I think there's a little more red coming up. Is it up there? Socrates, Plato, no, they were already up there, weren't they?
It's up at the top. Code of.
Yeah, thank you. You see it up there, the Code of Hammurabi and Zarathustra, which this is a religion that is still around today. You hear about them, especially in the Middle East. Okay, and then John Bosworth keeps on sending me text messages. So here's this guy, Clearchus. He's in 450 BC, so I'm still getting a little bit ahead of us. A man with an interest both in Delphi, which is the Greek god, way over here above Corinth, up here somewhere, and the religion and philosophy of the Indian gymnosophists, naked wise people is what that means. The Persian magi, sorry, when you go to the gymnasium, that's, anyway, the Persian magi and the Jewish priests. And he brings the Delphic maxims of the holy priest to Afghanistan, is what I'm saying. They didn't call it Afghanistan. Why? If God has already said, if Darius, if Nebuchadnezzar sent in a lesson, in a letter, that his ways are right, Jehovah's ways are right, why 300 years later, 200 years later, is this dude bringing these maxims from the Holy Pytho in Greece over here, and we can do this little exercise over and over. Aristotle, during his sojourn in Asia Minor, 348-345 BC, had a meeting with an educated Jew who had come thither, who was Hellenist, not in dialect, but also in the soul. So here's somebody from God's people who's supposed to be the light in the world, and converting other people. Instead, he's been converted. It's backwards. Here's another quote. So far as our own, this is Isocrates. He writes about Athens, so far as our own city outdistanced the rest of mankind in thought and in speech, and that includes Jerusalem, that her pupils have become the teachers of the rest of the world, and she has brought it about that the name Hellenist suggests no longer a race but an intelligence. We've got things flipped upside down, right? God had declared himself. He had shown himself to the world. Kings of the world are writing about Jehovah. Then why in the world are these Athenians writing this? Hellenism was a civilizing power which extended itself to every department of life. It fashioned in a peculiar manner the organization of the state, legislation, administration of justice, public arrangements, art and science, trade and industry, and the customs of daily life, down to fashion and ornaments, and thus impressed upon every department of life, whether its influence reached this, wherever its influence, the stamp of the Greek mind. We've got it backwards again. No, God is supposed to be the one who's out there stamping his image on everybody through the Jews, specifically in the law of Moses. Down here, I think Herodotus will write that the Greeks, oh, that's interesting, the Persians learned from the Greeks how to lie with boys, okay? But the point is, why are they learning anything from the Greeks? That's a moral. It's okay to do that. Why are they learning that from the Greeks instead of the Jews saying, no, that's not okay? And we could go on and on and on. But for the sake of this discussion, I'll stop. We have a hint of it in Ezra, even up into our text tonight. When Cyrus sent the Israelites back, do you remember what he told them to do? Simple.
Rebuild.
Rebuild. Rebuild the temple. Do you remember what he gave them to do it?
Yeah, he also asked them to pray for him that he would be great, I guess.
Yeah. Yes.
Just remember me before your God.
Right. So do you remember what he gave them to do it?
Anything they needed.
Anything they needed.
Right.
So they have the authority of the greatest king in the world telling them to go build it. They have the resources from the greatest king in the world telling them to go do it. And if that weren't enough, I don't even know how to state this properly, God had arranged the whole thing. Now, what happened? They come back in 536 or so, and there are two answers. The first one is the obvious one, the one that you see. What happened, or should I say, what didn't happen?
They didn't finish because they were challenged.
Yeah.
Stopped.
And they stopped. Why did they stop? What's the real answer? What is the real answer?
Lack of faith.
Lack of faith. Now, I understand that the world didn't want God, and so those pictures would still be up there with all those quotes. They probably would still be up there. But it sure doesn't help God when he puts his people and he says, you go be faithful. And as a result of that, my name will be glorified. And his people don't do what he told them to do. Right? In fact, we know it was unfaithfulness because another time in chapter 5, Ezra 5, Haggai and Zerubbabel come along and they start prophesying, and the people pick up their building implements and start building it, and they get challenged again. And what do they do this time? Or what don't they do this time?
They don't give up.
This time they don't stop. No difference. The only difference was inside of them, right? It was their faith. Okay. By the way, have you ever read Malachi? Someday we'll get there, Lord willing, right? Malachi? Is that just like, is that more like a Philippians or a Galatians? Say it again.
It's not pretty.
It's not pretty.
Yeah.
You guys are a mess. Huh. I wonder why it is the world, who was ready and looking for, other quotes I didn't put up there, for monotheism and a relationship with God in the afterlife. They're ready for it. They know there's our fake. Why didn't they just accept Jehovah? Well, because Jehovah's representatives were a mess. That's why Romans chapter 2, he'll say, the name of God is blasphemed because of you, my people. So, that's then, that's them. This is now. We're God's servants. We're his ambassadors. We're his representatives. When we don't live obediently and faithfully, because you can follow the letter of the law, right? Anybody can follow the letter of the law, but if you're not following it also combined with faith, so if we're not living that way, what kind of impact will that have on God's name? Same one as they had, right? So that's the point to observe. Look, in our little review so far, why is it that, okay, God brought him back, he established his name, but why doesn't everybody accept him? Part of it has to do with the fact that they weren't being who they ought to be. And every time that happens, you bring dishonor on God's name. Now, who wants to stand before God in the resurrection and say, I was the one who brought dishonor before your name? No, not a single one of us. Granted, here comes the opposition, and they might even have a sword. They're writing a letter to the king. Would there be pressure? No doubt. And so the more pressure there is, the more what? Faith. The more faith there has. That's it. Do you have pressure? Got any pressure in your life? Life is pressure. That's what it is. And so every time we have pressure, we're tempted, and we've just got to have more faith. It's easy to say. Yeah, it's actually easy to do, too. We've just got to have more faith. Just say, God, I need the help right now. Comment or question on our little review so far?
This reminds me of the difference between Jonah and Nahum.
Yeah?
And that is none, except for the hearts of the people they were teaching.
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
know, I mean, you can't look at Nahum and say, you see, God didn't get the message right through him that time because they rejected him that time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's similar to a point I'll bring up later. The difference was the hearts of the people. All right. In Ezra, we're in Ezra, and we're in chapter 5. They said, whoa, stop the building. And they didn't stop the building. They kept on. Then Darius finds Cyrus's decree, and Darius says, go and build it. So verse 13, Tattenai, so now we're picking up where we left off. Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and then a guy whose name I'm not going to pronounce, and their colleagues carry out the decree with all diligence, just as King Darius had sent. So Darius told the local pagan governors, help the Israelites, and so the local pagan governors helped the Israelites. That's what we just read. Verse 14, and the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. Now we have actually read till right there. The next word will be new material in our study. And they finished the building according to the command of God, of Israel, and the decree of Cyrus, of Darius, and Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar. That it was the 6th year of King Darius. So that's around 516 BC. 516 BC. So they built it. They finally get it done. It's somewhere, okay, a couple points from this. It said in verse 13 that they and their colleagues carry out the decree with all diligence. Wouldn't it be nice if that's what it had said about God's people? How sad, actually it's not sad that this is said of, but you notice this. The king said, you do it with all diligence, and guess what they did? They did it with all diligence. Now from now on, God will be able to point at them and say, they listened to a human king. You need to listen, or why haven't you been listening to me, the king of all kings, right? Just like in Jeremiah's day with the Rechabites. Verse 14, the building, they were successful in the building through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. Now, it said that the Jews were successful in the building. Could you imagine if they stopped and said, look what we have done. Oh, yes, look at this great thing we have done. Now, had they done it? Yes. But for them to say, look at this great thing that we have done, would that be appropriate? No. What would it be ignoring? The rest of the verse says, through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah. Yeah, to say, no, I know that I had a hand in this. I know I did something. But I need to remember that I'm only working with the Lord. Or I should say the Lord is working with me. I don't know how to say that. Right? Let's be careful not to assume too much in our own accomplishments. Look at the great I have done.
The way that's worded there, do you think it means we're successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai and Zechariah, that throughout the time of Haggai and Zechariah, or because Haggai and Zechariah were given the boot?
They were prompting them.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems to be cause and effect.
Okay, so
not
because
attended.
of the,
Yeah,
okay.
I can only say that. I don't have anything to jump up and down on, other than through the prophecy. Yes, I don't take it to be a time. I know that in chapter 5 they weren't doing anything. The prophets show up and then they're doing something. So there is a cause and effect. Now, at the same time, what if Haggai and Zechariah had said, Look what we have done. I mean, hey, they weren't doing anything before we showed up. Look what we have done. Had they done something? Absolutely. In fact, they'd done what God told them to. But, like George just pointed out a minute ago, if Haggai and Zechariah said, oh, look what we have done. We're the ones that got them to do the building. Two things about this. Number one, that forgets the power of the Word. And in combination with the power of the Word, as George pointed out before, is the heart of the person, right? The building wasn't complete just because they had showed up and prophesied. Number one, they were just the messengers. The power was in the Word, and the power only was effective because the people allowed themselves, because they had the right hearts. So, this is, while we're going around and doing our work that we've got to do, we have to be humble and be careful not to take on too much on the work that we have done. Comments or questions on anything here? It says that they finished. In verse 14, it says they finished building according to the command of God. It took them roughly 4 years to complete this. From here, if you do the math, it takes them 4 years to finish. Haggai and Zechariah show up in the... Zechariah? Yeah, Zechariah show up in the 2nd year of Darius, and they completed in the 4th year, the 6th year, which is 4 years. So apparently it took them a little bit of time. So when could they have had this done? In theory, when could they have had this building built?
First year.
Yeah, the first year, or certainly not 24 years after they had returned. No, it took them too long. But yet God allowed that, didn't He? He gave them a second chance to get the building done. Has God ever given you a second chance to do something? Right? Every day, all day long, He is the God of second chances. And aren't we grateful for that? Okay. So, speaking of God of second chances, we're going to do this again right now. Verse 16, the sons of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. They offered for the dedication of this temple of God 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, corresponding to the number of tribes of Israel. Then they appointed the priests to their divisions and the Levites in their orders for the service of God in Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. So this is not a reformation. This is a restoration. Okay, they're up and running again. They're back in the land. They got the temple going, and they've got everything going according to the law of God, which is the way it has to be. Right? Okay. It says they celebrated the feast of dedication, or they celebrated the dedication. Had they ever celebrated a dedication of a house or something like a house of God before?
Sure, it's Solomon.
Yeah, Solomon. And then I said, or something like a house.
Tabernacle.
The tabernacle. So why do they keep on celebrating this new building?
Because they keep rebuilding.
Why do they keep rebuilding it?
Because they
Stop celebrating.
Right. They keep sinning. And this is a point about sin. What do we say? Sin takes you farther than you want to go, keeps you longer than you want to stay, and costs you more than you want to pay. And another thing it does, it keeps you starting over and over and over and over and over again. That's what you do. I've already been here. Why am I here again? Why am I not further down the road? Well, because you sinned. That's Hebrews chapter 5, right? Hebrews chapter 5 says, look, you have to have the milk given to you again. Why don't I get some of the meat? Because you haven't been practicing. Unfaithfulness, I would suggest weak faith, sin, they all keep you hovering around the starting point in this case, right? So we're not surprised when we look at ourselves or we look at somebody else and say, why are they still right there? Why have they not progressed? And then we look and we find out later on, oh, in their life they've got some sin, they've got some unfaithfulness, whatever is happening. But again, this is not what God prefers, but God allows it. And we have to be humble and say, thank you, God, for allowing that, because I need it myself more often than I'd like to. It says that they celebrated it in verse 16 with joy. Now, when they had laid the foundation, do you remember what they did when they laid the foundation? Chapter 3, verse 11, they sang, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, saying, He is good. Yeah, they're making progress. And you make progress and you see it there and you say, God is good, because you're all excited. Now, for the 20 years when there was no progress being made, was God still good then? Right? George was telling me just the other day, there's something going around somewhere on Facebook where somebody said, don't tell me God is good, because I'm having a bad day. I'm oversimplifying. But it's a really bad day. I've had some bad thing happen to me today. And today is not the day for you to walk up to me and tell me God is good. Well, God's always good. It's valid to say God is good anytime. Okay, verse 19. The exiles observed the Passover on the 14th. So now they've got the building set up, they've dedicated the building, and now they're going to go right into more of the ceremonial law. The exiles observed the Passover on the 14th of the first month. The priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were pure. They slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, both for their brothers and the priests and for themselves. The sons of Israel who returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land to join them to seek the Lord God of Israel, ate the Passover. And they observed the feast of unleavened bread. Remember, that happens right afterward, right? For 7 days, with joy. For the Lord had caused them to rejoice, and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them to encourage them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. A couple points from this. Number one, it says in verse 21, the sons of Israel who returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of people that came back from Babylon. And you remember there had been some Jews remaining in the land, and there were nations moved in. So the ones who returned, and some of the ones who were always in the land, separated themselves. And they partook of the Passover. Did all of the ones who were in the land all the time, did all of them separate themselves? Am I making sense? Do you understand the question? Let me ask you this. Let me ask this way. There were some who were in exile who returned to Israel. Did all who were in exile return to Israel? No, they didn't. In most of the cases, maybe I need to be careful. In some of the cases, why didn't they return?
They're comfortable where they were.
They didn't want to.
The dead burying their own dead, kind of, right?
Right. Exactly. They just didn't want to. You know, it's hard to say this, but some just don't want to. That's it. They just don't want to. What do I do? So there's a Pulitzer Prize winning jazz trumpeter who taught at Juilliard School in New York City. And this guy is just a genius. He's still alive now. And he said about his students, if you want to learn, I cannot stop you. If you don't want to learn, I cannot teach you. No different. We're going to celebrate the feast of the Lord today. Okay, not interested. All right. No, I'll tell you again. Are you sure? Are you sure you're not interested? Nope, I'm not interested. Okay. I'm going with those who are. An application could be, hey, we're assembling tonight, Thursday night. Like we always do. Not interested. What do I do? If you want to learn, I can't stop you, right? We all know, all of us in here have dedicated ourselves to learning something. We know what it's like to want to learn something. And you know what it's like when you see it in somebody else. They want to learn. You're not going to stop them from learning, even if it's bad. You're not going to stop them from learning what's bad. If you don't want to learn, I can't. Our influence only goes so far, right? It said in verse 21, the Lord had caused them to rejoice and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them to encourage them. First of all, do you notice what he called Darius here? Or Cyrus, however you want to look at it. He called Darius or Cyrus the king of Assyria. Technically, whoever it was he was talking about, were they the king of Assyria?
Because they were the king of Babylon and Syria was part of.
Right. And do you remember in Daniel chapter 7? In fact, let's just turn there. Daniel 7. There are the beasts. Daniel. Yes, not Saul. Oh, dear. Right. That's why we do this. If somebody wants to learn, they will learn. Daniel chapter 7. The four beasts. Verse 4, there's the lion, there's the bear, then there's, in verse 6, the leopard, then there's the fourth beast. I kept looking in verse 9 until the thrones were set up and the ancient days took its place. Verse 11, I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. This is exactly what it's talking about. Look, he was ethnically an Assyrian. And so here's an illustration of what Daniel 7 is talking about. Okay, that's interesting. Now, the Lord had caused them to rejoice. By the way, did he do it directly? No, indirectly. And had turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them. Did he do it directly or indirectly? I'm guessing he did it indirectly, like he did with who else? Pharaoh or who else? But do you notice the Lord turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them? Because he, God, what? He can. I'm pretty impressed with that. Chapter 7 and verse 27, at the end of it, these Israelites are saying, blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who has put such things as this in the king's heart to adorn the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. Talking about later on down the road with Artaxerxes. And then, in Ezra chapter 1, verse 1, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he did exactly what God wanted him to do, which, for the Jews, was pretty nice. Right? Proverbs 21. And verse 1. Proverbs 21 and verse 1. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. Because God has that kind of power. Now, God can do that for the king. So, little church here, we want the governor to give us some special protection. I don't know what the case would be. Could we pray to God and say, God, you have the power to change the governor's heart in a way that would be favorable for us to bring you glory? Could we do it? Yes. And might God actually answer positively? Yes. Even if he doesn't, he still could have. And that's the kind of faith. Now, we can say that about the president, the governor, the mayor. It doesn't matter who it is. Does it apply to anybody who's not in politics? Can God change my boss's heart? God can change hearts. Now, it takes what to trust that? I'm kind of saying the same thing twice there.
A changed heart. Is that?
I'm talking about myself. I know God. Now, I'm out there. I don't know. There's a billion different applications. I'm thinking one right now. I have a boss. And I need to approach my boss and say, boss, I need Sundays off. I haven't asked that before. And he said, by all appearances, has been rotten and nasty all of his life up until now. Can God change him? For the 3 hours we need on Sunday? He could. What will it take for me to ask God or to ask my boss?
Faith.
Faith. Right. So I was saying the same thing. It takes faith to trust that God can change hearts. When you ask with confidence. Whatever it is, I'm talking about this one specific, but ask with confidence. I know God can do it, and so walk in there. I know He can do it. He's the King of the universe. I know He can do it, so I'm going to ask in confidence. And even if the answer is eventually no from this person, you can still be confident because, number one, God could have, and number two, you still did what God wanted you to do. So whatever happens, you can walk out of there in confidence, complete confidence. I'm impressed. I don't know if it's right here or I don't know where it is on my note. Johan was telling me that somebody was coming to church and realized that they needed to change their hours so that they could assemble with the Christians. And so they walked up to their boss and said, "Can I change?" And the boss said, "Yes, you can." And so this person, what a wonderful illustration of somebody who has the faith to go up to their boss and say, "I need to change my hours." And the person wasn't even a Christian yet. The person became a Christian very shortly after that. But can you imagine that? Here's an unbeliever. Well, no, wrong. Here's a believer who is not yet a Christian, who has the faith and sees it and says, "Man, I've got to do something." He saw that before he saw his need to be baptized. What faith? And whatever I'm lacking faith in my life, I'm not in the situation where I have to ask for a change in my hours. I've got a lot of other situations, and wherever it is I'm lacking faith, man, does He ever make me look bad. It's a horrible thing.
We've been following, trying to keep in touch with Gary and Deb Jalbert since they went down to Texas. And he went through 3 or 4 jobs pretty quickly. And it was always, yes, you can have Sundays off. And then it was, no, you can't have Sundays off.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'll give you my 2 weeks notice. And boom, boom, we got a note from him today. He's been at a job for a year now. They absolutely love him. The boss had to cut everybody's hours except Gary's.
Yeah, God can.
And this is how we go from celebrating a rebuilt temple to wallowing in the evil again. Because those instances where we're supposed to do something and lower our expectations below what we think God can do for us, and so we find ourselves in situations where we wouldn't necessarily had to have been or missing out on things that we'll never know God had perhaps in place for us, because the courage or the trust that He could do it really didn't show up. And so it's kind of the negative side, and by negative in the opposite sense. It's like you're not actively doing the wrong thing, but you're missing all these opportunities to show the faith, and so you start whittling yourself down.
Yeah. Limiting yourself, losing faith. Faith is this thing that we build. We build faith. We maintain faith. We increase faith by obedience. And when you're not stretching your muscles, you're atrophying. There's another similar situation. There's a young man who's a Christian in Russia, and he needed a job. He needed a job. He's one of those guys who works day to day, gets paid day to day. But he's a very good plasterer, is essentially what it is. He did a lot of work. He was the head man on a lot of work before George Bush went to St. Petersburg back in 1994 or something like that. So he's well qualified. So the Jewish synagogue, the biggest Jewish synagogue in Russia, calls him up. He hasn't had a job for months. Calls him up and says, "Hey, do you want this job?" He went and looked at it. He called me. I was there in Russia at the time. He said, "Lee, would you take the job?" And I told him, I said, "I'm not going to judge you on what you end up doing, but I wouldn't." He didn't. because he was thinking the same thing. And do you know he's okay now? He's okay now, right? I don't know if that was exactly, but here he would have been facilitating false religion. That's the way I look at it. By the way, my dad and I have had this conversation because before I was a Christian, as a carpenter, several churches in the little town of Morris, New York called us up and said, hey, will you come up and work on our room? And we did. And after I became a Christian, I thought to myself, I don't think I'd do that. And so Dad and I, we got into it. You know, I don't know what Dad thinks now, but so things are different. If Dad called me up right now and said, hey, do you want to go build the Methodist church? I'd say no. All right. Here is another quote. By the way, I'm not quoting Herodotus as a source, an authority from God. That's not what I'm doing. But what we'll see in our little study here of Esther, Herodotus writes about Xerxes. That's what most of the book is about. So there's a lot of the same...
Wait. Are you leaving Ezra?
No. I'm about to, but not yet. Where is it? I need to go to... Yes, I'm sorry. So, there was a coup. This is how Darius becomes King Darius, okay? There's a coup. They're working out the details. They got to get it done right then, that day. Because he says, look, you guys called me and asked me here. If I leave without us committing to it, to doing it this day, it's going to get out and we're all going to die. I'm not going to have that. So we got to do it now. And they said, what's the plan? And he said, I've thought about this. And they said, we need more information. And he said, there are many things which cannot be described in word, and yet they may be done. Again, there are many that are capable of being planned in word, and yet no great action has ever resulted. That is faith. I can't tell you, no, we need to be able to defend, but you get the idea here. Look, I can't explain how this is going to happen. We just got to go do it, right? That's what he's talking about. So I find it interesting that he didn't call it faith, and he doesn't call it faith in God, but he's talking about the same thing as faith. Can I reasonably explain this to you? No. I just trust God, and that's enough for me. Okay, what do you want to say about Ezra?
I had a question. You said in 1b, question 1b.
Oh?
What did the Jews, what are they actually called in this text? What did the Jews do and how? Do and how, I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter. That's not relevant to my question. What are they actually called in this text? What was your answer there? What were you looking for?
They're called two things in this text. Where am I? At verse, I think it's verse 14, they're called the Jews. And then in verse 14, they're also called Israel. Verse 16, the sons of Israel. I've just done. Go ahead.
Okay, so that was too simple for me.
Yeah, okay.
I was wondering if you're going something for the fact that all 12 tribes were represented here. Because
not in that question, but yes.
12 goats are, I mean, I don't know. I thought maybe I was looking too deep, not just in your question, but but it seemed to me like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like there's any tribes missing.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I would not say it's a necessary or forced conclusion from here, because they could be offering sacrifice for tribes that are everywhere else.
Right, yeah.
But, yes, it does go in line with chapter, well, one of them is chapter 2, verse 70. The temple servants lived in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. So all Israel's back in the land, and we know it from Ezra chapter 2, but yes, there's a bunch of others that are sprinkled throughout Ezra, like you just hinted at, like you just talked about, that seem to say, no, all Israel's back in the land.
Okay.
We need to stop. Unless you have another, anybody else, anything else? I know I skimmed and missed. And there's a lot of good stuff. Hey, you guys brought your... Okay, bring them again next week. Woohoo! No song.